Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic a Podcast Story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, check out our special introductory episode, Introduction: Who Are We and What Are We Doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week we will be talking about Bohemian Rhapsody.
Happy holidays! This is our Christmas episode because the number one suggested film is Bohemian Rhapsody. I knew that once we had an episode on Bohemian Rhapsody, it would probably be the first thing that people would look at on checking out the podcast. So I wanted to wait until we had reached a certain consistent quality level before we tackled it. We went into this 8 months ago with zero podcasting experience and zero audio editing experience. And some of the early episodes are rough. I knew that would happen, and for the sake of the long game, I thought we have to wait on Bohemian Rhapsody.
Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
Trigger warning! This movie contains depictions of drug abuse, mild ethnic slurs, period-adjacent homophobia, hints of what AIDS looked like before what was initially known as the cocktail, and other medications that have thankfully turned HIV and AIDS into mere inconveniences so long as you live in a first world country and maintain decent health insurance. And this movie also contains dubiously convincing buck teeth.
Rena, can you please give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning! We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
So, Rena, can you tell us a little bit about Freddie Mercury and the English rock band known as Queen?
Sure. Freddie Mercury, the lead singer for Queen, was born as Farrokh Bulsara on September 5th, 1946, in Zanzibar, on the East African coast of what is now Tanzania. His family were Indian Parsi and were members of the Zoroastrian religion, one of the world's oldest faiths. At the age of 7, he was sent off to live with relatives in India so that he could attend boarding school near Mumbai, where he formed his first rock group, the Hectics, at the age of 12, because teenagers around the world were tuning in for the global phenomena that was the birth of rock and roll. He would see his parents and younger sister once a year until going back to Zanzibar in 1963. However, the following year, his family left Zanzibar due to political turmoil to start over in London, where the era of swinging London was underway. Freddie Mercury is celebrated for his 4-octave vocal range and incredible showmanship. He formed the band Queen along with Brian May on guitar, Roger Taylor on drums, and John Deacon on bass, and they were one of the most successful rock groups of all time. Their classic hit albums include A Night at the Opera and Queen 2, among others. Their song Bohemian Rhapsody has the distinction of being the only song to go to number 1 on the charts in multiple decades. Other beloved Queen hits include We Are the Champions, Somebody to Love, Another One Bites the Dust, You're My Best Friend, We Will Rock You, Fat Bottom Girls, and the David Bowie collaboration Under Pressure, to name a very small sample. Their performance at 1985's Live Aid is considered by some in the know to be the greatest live performance in the history of rock and roll. Fast forwarding through a slew of other things that we will get to in the course of this podcast, Freddie Mercury died of AIDS in 1991, but the remaining members of Queen are still alive as of 2024. And as the child of an academic and an acute Anglophile, I would like to note here that Brian May belatedly earned a doctorate in astrophysics in 2007 for a thesis that he had started over 35 years earlier and became Sir Brian May in 2023, and that Roger Taylor has the accidental distinction of being one of only 2 non-royal Britons to appear on a British postal stamp while still alive. because he was in the background on his drum kit on a Freddie Mercury commemorative stamp, and they just overlooked, oops, we're putting a living person on a stamp. John Deacon's gimmick is that he is boring, despite having laid down some of the most memorable bass lines of all time. And Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the movie Bohemian Rhapsody?
Bohemian Rhapsody, the film, is 2018 biographical musical drama film focusing on the life of Freddie Mercury and the formation of the band, and it goes through to the 1985 Live Aid performance that you mentioned. It was debatably directed by the monster Bryan Singer with a very big assist from functional human being and, as far as I know, unproblematic director Dexter Fletcher, from a screenplay by Anthony McCartan. It stars Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury, also Lucy Boynton, Gwilym Lee, Ben Hardy, Joseph Mazzello, Aidan Gillen, Tom Hollander, and we'll get to this, Mike Myers in supporting roles. Queen members Brian May and Roger Taylor also served as consultants. And this movie was a huge, huge hit. It grossed $910.8 million worldwide on a production budget of about $50 million, becoming the sixth highest grossing film of 2018 worldwide. This movie has a pretty storied journey to screen. It was initially announced in 2010 with Sacha Baron Cohen set to play Freddie Mercury. He left the project in 2013 following, quote, creative differences with producers. Project languished for several years. At one point, Ben Whishaw was considered to be a possible replacement to Sacha Baron Cohen. It came back from the dead in 2016 when Rami Malek was cast. Bryan Singer supposedly served as the director through most of principal photography, which began in London in September of 2017 and then was fired in December 2017 due to, quote, frequent absences and clashes with the cast and crew. Dexter Fletcher, who we also know directed Rocket Man, he had originally been set to direct the movie when it was early in development. He was hired to complete the film. Ultimately, though, due to Directors Guild of America guidelines, Bryan Singer retained the sole director credit, and Fletcher received an executive producer credit. Some of the other history and lore here, too, is that Sacha Baron Cohen left. So, as I mentioned, creative differences, but allegedly he wanted to make this movie more of a gritty R-rated tell-all, and the band wanted a PG-rated film about their story. There's also potentially apocryphal tales that Brian May wanted to make the movie all about how Queen moved on without Freddie, which I don't know that that's true. You're shaking your head.
I'm shaking that my head because it's an awful idea, and I don't think anyone would watch that.
Also, fun fact, Sacha Baron Cohen also attempted to recruit some other directors to the project, including David Fincher, which interesting movie, and also Tom Hooper, who I believe should not be allowed to go anywhere or brought anywhere except to Morgan Stanley's HR department to get a job in finance. He shouldn't be allowed near art. I'm glad they didn't bring him onto this project because I don't know how much more like mediocre this movie could be. Spoiler alert, I don't care for this film. So some of the sources we used in this episode include the book Somebody to Love by Matt Richards, Is This the Real Life? The Untold Story of Queen by Mark Blake, Queen, The Ultimate Illustrated History of the Crowned Kings of Rock by Phil Sutcliffe. Also articles from Slate, Bustle, the New York Times, Vanity Fair, the Mirror, IndieWire, more Vanity Fair, and also a story about where the Live Aid money went from Spin.
Yes, there is strong evidence that quite a great deal of that Live Aid money went to Ethiopian warlords.
His heart was in the right place.
Anyway, Queen. So, the worst thing that I can think of to say about Queen would be to call them the rich man's sticks, which is not necessarily an insult, depending on who you ask.
I am going to say that that is harsh just because I think Queen is a superior product with a superior frontman. And I am one of the dozens of Styx super fans. I love Dennis DeYoung and his like big theater kid energy, but Queen is much more important.
Anywhere in the world, you can watch this 22 minutes of Queen performing, and it is 22 minutes of energetic joy, and you feel fantastic, which is a much greater source of happiness than weapons purchased by warlords with the Live Aid money. One of the remarkable things that I note when I watch videos of Queen performing is that these four men sound so unified, but look like they have nothing to do with each other. I have watched the YouTube video of Queen at Live Aid at least 8 or 9 times, and it has been awesome every time. Brian May has said that he thinks that Queen sounded rough at Live Aid and that it was Mercury's performance that carried them, but I would argue that the energy of coming together like that is what makes the performance great, in contrast to whatever imperfections Brian May thinks he hears.
I don't have anything unique to say about it except like everyone who says it's one of the greatest performances, live performances that's ever happened is correct. This whole Live Aid concern in the film creates what I would say is the film's most successful gambit, which is by putting this moment of tremendous triumph at the end of this movie and reminding those of us who are aware of that performance, it takes us there. We forget that Rami Malek is lip syncing against a green screen to a crowd made up of AI humans. And like the last 15 minutes of this movie are to me like akin to the Lou Gehrig story where it does that Men in Black thing and erases all of the bullshit that came before it in your brain and leaves you with the feeling you get watching tens of thousands of people do the Radio Gaga hands. I was watching it afterward with the sound off because I do feel like this movie is as manipulative as The Passion of the Christ, maybe more so. I'm watching Mr. Robot cosplay Freddie Mercury in front of a green screen. This movie uses Freddie Mercury and the music of Queen as a human shield against criticism, and I hate it for that.
And I'm going to say for the first time, I really enjoy this movie. Anyway, it's noteworthy to me about Live Aid in general that they don't play their five most famous songs, but found five that blend and segue into each other perfectly. I would venture that very few people familiar with Queen would say that Hammer to Fall is one of the five most important Queen songs, but I'll be singing it for like days after watching Live Aid. It's um it's sort of like how a greatest hits selection organization by chart position or chronology is never the best album by any artist. And I guess a little about things I love about Freddie Mercury. I love Freddie Mercury for being unashamed when he was accused of being pretentious. I've been accused of being pretentious for over 30 years, and it's usually just when I'm being myself. And some of the most hurtful instances have happened when I was being at my most vulnerable and open. And I think you like what you like, and we should apply the same generosity of spirit to people who are genuinely into things that most of us deem kind of highfalutin that we do when we say to not judge people for lowbrow guilty pleasures.
Agreed 100%. I was re-listening to Queen's Live at Wembley concert another time that they played live in front of like tens of thousands of people and had them in the palm of their hand. And I know that we're supposed to be more advanced now, but in some ways I feel like we're more prudish and less willing to have fun. Like Freddie Mercury in this concert on this album sings Big Spender from Sweet Charity, a splashy Broadway musical by Cy Coleman from the 60s. He sings this in front of this crowd with like a rock beat behind him, and they are all loving it. And it is the gayest thing that's ever happened. And I love that he was, I mean, I have nothing but good things to say about Queen and about Freddie Mercury. They're an astonishingly strong set of musicians and probably like the smartest collectively band that ever existed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I love that he was a weird misfit who was pretentious and was like loved opera and loved rock and roll and sang a show tune like this in full voice in front of this crowd, and they ate it up. And where is that world now? It's weird that like the 80s we were somehow more accepting of this than we would be now.
He was singing Hey Big Spender like in the 70s. He did it at like a show for prospective industry people once. He didn't give a fuck. The thing about the word pretentious is it's the pretense part in it. You're only pretentious if you're pretending.
Yeah, and he was this guy.
He
Like,
was not pretending to be into anything he liked that was caviar to the general.
I want to be clear that my dislike of it has nothing to do with this music and with this band and with Freddie Mercury.
But anyway, we open on Freddie Mercury waking up in bed at his London home and coughing. We see him trimming his mustache, and we learn that it is the day of the Live Aid concert. We see Freddie feeding his cats, who live like royalty. We have some wonderful shots throughout this movie where it cuts to cats looking at things. I loved this. In emphasizing that Freddie is a cat person, I feel that Bohemian Rhapsody avoids one of my least favorite filmic cliches, the one where they show that someone is likable and good by showing them being affectionate towards a happily responsive dog. Based on the portrayal here, I would guess that if Freddie Mercury ever met a dog, he would give it the side eye and say, "What are you panting over, darling? Have a bit of dignity." I don't think I saw any dogs in this movie. The cat person experience is rarely ever given a positive portrayal on film, and I am here for it.
Indeed.
So we have some scenes of getting ready at Wembley where everything looks very authentic down to the 80s tech and that hair that's like puffy on top and then longer in the back, even when they're not trying to be mullety. You see all of these accoutrements that will have meaning to you if you're a Queen fan, like them getting Brian May's red special guitar out of, and like shining a light on it. And they're playing at Old Wembley Stadium. There is a whole saga of how the stadium they're at is no longer around, even though it had these towers from the 1920s that were a national icon, and it had one of their historic ratings, and it was a whole thing about, oh, leave the towers, but then they got in the way, and yeah, even though Britain is usually very good about these things, you can look it up. There's a whole story to why not just Old Wembley, but also the towers are no longer there. And they say it was not a very comfortable stadium, but I don't care about that. I like pretty towers.
Well,
They're about to go into what is a possibly the most common framing device in the biopic. Begin when the subject is famous, so that the audience will know that they should care about this person on account of them being famous. Then cut back to before they were famous, possibly childhood, and move forward. It is the most used framing device in biopics over the past 20 years, but I will give Bohemian Rhapsody credit for sticking to one framing device. One of our signs of a weak biopic is that it uses, say, four framing devices like Gotti.
we've seen this framing device so many times so early in our journey. I feel like it's been in about 50% of our movies. But I'm going to give credit here to this movie. I think like the opening of this movie captures incredibly well what it's like to go out on stage. I felt like right there with the tension of being about to go out on stage with him.
Freddie bounces up onto the stage, and we cut back to London 1970, where one of the first things we see is Freddie picking up some pin money by handling baggage at Heathrow Airport, where he's throwing suitcases, and somebody calls him a Paki, and Freddie says, "I'm not from Pakistan." So stick a pin in "I'm not from Pakistan." And I'd imagine this is like a sore point because no, he's not from Pakistan. He's Parsi. And this is about ignorant people not knowing, like, subdivision, not knowing more than one ethnicity to bug a person with. We have an elephant in the room here surrounding Rami Malek's prosthetic buck teeth. I really like Bohemian Rhapsody a lot, and I've seen it 3 or 4 times, and at no point have I been bothered by Rami Malek's teeth.
They make me incredibly angry. I want to caveat this and be really clear. I think Rami Malek is a very good actor. And I think he has a lane. And I want to know, why am I not watching Oscar Isaac play Freddie Mercury? I feel like Rami Malek is miscast in this film. I feel like these buck teeth make him look kind of like if Nick Kroll were playing Rami Malek in a Kroll show sketch about the biopic tropes of Bohemian Rhapsody. I can't handle these teeth. I can't handle the way that it causes him to set his mouth. I don't understand why he swept every award the year this movie came out. I don't get it. It's a fine performance, but it's like he's lip syncing for half this movie. And I'm not suggesting that someone should be like trying to sing like Freddie Mercury, but it's kind of like you just gave this guy an Oscar for lip syncing and the teeth. Anyway.
I don't understand how the false buck teeth are such a problem for you when you've never noticed that Dan Aykroyd's eyes don't match, despite having watched Ghostbusters at least 10 or 20 times more than I have.
Want to just take you on a little journey through our back catalog and approximately 120 minutes that we had to leave on the cutting room floor of you talking about a janky pair of earrings in Bessie.
Yes.
And how much those upset you, and yet you're looking at these teeth and they're so there and they don't bother you.
So those earrings looked like they were made out of clear plastic. They were supposed to be this very nice pair of emerald earrings, and they looked fake. They looked fake. And if I go on, I will repeat everything that I said in
I
that.
know, I know. I'm really like, I'm sorry that I even opened this door.
I think I'm probably likelier to get mad about a fashion thing. I didn't have a problem with the teeth, and come to think of it, I was also the one who didn't have a problem with Bryan Cranston's fake ears in the All the Way episode. I honestly don't think they're that bad, and I would have been more disturbed by an LBJ who didn't have the ears, or a Freddie Mercury who didn't have buck teeth, because that gets in the way of my how I imagine them in my head. They needed for whoever was playing Freddie to have buck teeth in order to be believable as Freddie. They had a ton of money riding on it. And these look like real teeth that could have conceivably grown in Rami Malek's mouth had his DNA said, "You're going to have really prominent buck teeth like Freddie Mercury." Actually, on watching footage of Queen in preparation for this episode, I thought that Freddie Mercury's real teeth were even worse looking than Rami Malek's false ones.
Rena, can you see them? Did you look at them? Did you look at his teeth? They're hideous. And also, like, if Bryan Cranston's fake ears were hanging out of his mouth in LBJ, I think you would have had a problem with them. That's the equivalent here. Like these are like comically giant and face reshaping. Rami Malek is a very nice looking young man, and Freddie Mercury is beautiful in like this Byron-esque way where like it's like no one has ever looked like him before. Those teeth worked on Freddie Mercury, but like here they are weird and parody. It's they're awful. Did you see them? Did you see the teeth?
I did. I don't think they're that bad. Um, but I think that the real problem here is this is yet another thing that we can blame on British colonialism because the British colonized Zanzibar and the British are notorious for their awful teeth. If the Bulsara family had gone to America, Freddie would have had his teeth fixed and you and I would have nothing to fight over.
Fair enough.
Although Freddie attributed his vocal range to having four extra teeth in his
Uh,
mouth.
and
So
that
Queen may not be there.
Yeah, that tracks with my knowledge of anatomy and of voice training. Like, if you can have four extra teeth, like stretching out your palate vocally, like that is insane
So why doesn't everyone with that problem have a great voice?
because they're not Freddie Mercury.
So anyway, we cut to Freddie at a bus stop and a scene of
Freddie and his teeth at a bus stop.
yes, and then we go into the Bulsara home where Freddie's father is unimpressed with him, so we have the trope of the unsupportive parent, but his mom and his sister are nice, and he goes to hear the band Smile, led by some guy named Tim at the time, and we get our first view of Brian May and Roger Taylor, played by Gwilym Lee and Ben Hardy. The flaw in the casting here is not something that Ben Hardy or any man could help. The issue is that Roger Taylor is one of the prettiest men of all time, and Ben Hardy is a pretty man. But this is the reverse of the normal situation where whoever plays someone in a movie is like them 2.0. Roger Taylor in the I Want to Break Free video is prettier than 99% of women can ever hope to be, even on like our wedding day when we have people fussing over us and we have that like bump that comes from being like really happy. And the distraction for me here is that whoever you cast as Roger Taylor is not going to be as pretty as Roger Taylor. I think the term they use is fishy when someone is convincing. And I heard theories in my process of researching this that part of why the I Want to Break Free video got them into hot water in America. In this video, they're all in drag, is because Roger Taylor is wearing a one of those schoolgirl uniforms with the little pleated skirt, and that straight male executives were uncomfortable with feeling turned on by how pretty Roger Taylor is in that video.
That's like when Hanson started, and people would be like, the lead singer's really cute. She's so adorable. And it's like, that's a dude.
So the story of how Queen formed happened in stages and would be very tedious to show on screen. The tale of how members of iterations of Smile 1984 and Ibex eventually formed Queen and were then joined by John Deacon is similar to how the members of Queen who are not Freddie Mercury are without Freddie Mercury. Boring.
So you're telling me they all didn't just like run into each other in a parking lot and start singing like they do in this movie?
They knew each other around. Freddie and Roger were roommates for a while and ran a vintage clothing market stall. They were in and out of bands, and Freddie wanted to join at one point, and it was a process that would be super and then-y. Like, there is no way to make that montage not be boring.
I'm going to allow it because that does sound very boring. Also, Taylor and Deacon are like the Kevin Dillon and Frank Whaley of this movie. They are two like human shaped ciphers who could be like computer graphics in the background. Brian May is almost nothing in this movie, too. Like, we know so little about any of these people. I know that this is about Freddie Mercury, but like the underdevelopment of the band and how they worked so well together really bothers me.
None of those men would be rock stars without Freddie Mercury, but I thought that the two actors playing Roger Taylor and John Deacon were subtle and understated and were doing the job they were hired for, which was to not upstage Freddie.
Yeah.
I also thought that Joe Mazzello had good delivery on some lines where he's the one who like diffuses theatrics between like Freddie and Roger.
They were both great. The characters are meaningless. All of the actors in this movie are talented and do their best. And I think like those two did acquit themselves admirably with really underwritten roles. I agree with you that none of these men would be rock stars without Freddie Mercury.
I think you see way more from the other members of Queen in this than you do from the non-Morrison Doors in The Doors, which sort of became the template for the musical biopic for a while. But unlike The Doors, it's easy to see the joy and why people loved this band. And you see them having a great time recording together, which you don't see in The Doors, except for that one scene around the closing credits that we agreed was better than the rest of the movie because they actually look like they're having fun.
I think you'd have more fun on the Bataan Death March than being a member of the Doors.
And a note of Brian May appreciation here. I love Brian May. I love it that he has one guitar that he built himself as a teenager because he couldn't afford the Fender that he wanted, and that he doesn't smash instruments. And he has carried on playing the Red Special when he could buy any guitar he wanted. I love it that Brian May just happens to be an astrophysicist and that he's such a nerd, and I made that as a compliment. And he's an example of that talents tend to come in clusters, that when someone's brilliant at one thing, you'll often find out that they're brilliant at another thing.
Oh, I was just going to say that like their smartness and their nerdiness does come through in how like ultimately like respectful they are of property.
There's a story that I love that like when he that Brian May went to Cambridge University after he had finally gotten this doctorate, and one of the other astrophysicists said, "You're the only one of us who actually looks like Sir Isaac Newton."
Oh, that's adorable.
Yes. So Freddie goes to a Smile gig while he was a fan. They act like this is his first time interacting with Roger and Brian when he knew both of them beforehand, as we detailed, and also Mary Austin, who Freddie also meets for the first time, according to this movie this night, was casually dating Brian May. Brian May is played by an actor named Gwilym Lee, who I think does a great job here, and who I really loved as the Russian aristocrat Grigor Dimov on The Great, a show that was ostensibly about Catherine the Great of Russia, but admitted to being mostly made up and was really a parody on the sexed up historical series that started with the Tudors, and also sort of masterpiece theater costume porn. So Smile has just had a big setback. Their lead singer has left to join a band called Humpy Bong. I did not believe that Humpy Bong was a real band name, but I looked it up and it was.
Is that British for something?
I don't know. I don't care. Brian is like, Humpy Bong? The point is for all of us to be incredulous that anyone would ever leave Brian May and Roger Taylor and being in a band with them to go join something called Humpy Bong.
Mary Austin is played by Lucy Boynton. I love like seeing her and stuff because I'm like, you're just so pretty. Um, she's probably a very good actor too, but I am very fixated on like the fact that I think she's so pretty. You and I were also talking this week about how every one of these movies about rock stars ends up being all about like these great men and like the woman who strives to maybe be a counterpart, but she ends up being like this combination of like a real sex doll, a cook, the wolf in Pulp Fiction and, quote, Muse. And Muse is an awful gig. No one makes money. It's like being an intern back in the day of like interning at magazines where they're like, we'll give you one college credit and the experience of doing this. And you're like, that sounds like money, except it's not. And with this, like, I don't even think you get to go on to another job after being like the emotional water bearer for these monstrously egotistical men.
And the men in these movies, they want a supportive sex doll slash cook slash muse slash mother, whereas the women who merit biopics want to be matched. Talent for talent, spark for spark, or why bother? We don't need a... We learn to support ourselves in this world. I honestly think that Mary is boring, at least as we see her here. And she makes me nostalgic for Diego Rivera in Frida.
We also find out that Mary works at Biba, which is a department store in London that I would definitely travel to if I had a time machine. I'm obsessed with how like weird this store was and how beautiful. I bet you could buy like a leopard or something like that in the basement of Biba from like a beautiful display of animals or something like that.
What we saw here for Biba wasn't enough. I wanted to see everything and wander around in it and have them do a walk around, so that I wanted a recreation that we didn't really get. And there was some effort where they had the mannequins with like the big eye makeup and the peacock feather wallpaper. So yeah, Freddie runs into Mary there and they invent guy liner. This store is so built up in my ex-fashion intern's head that nothing could compete.
But yeah, they form the band NBD. They all harmonize instantly.
Yeah, Freddie says, hey, I can sing. They're like, haha, your teeth. And then he sings and they all harmonize. We cut to a gig where John Deacon joins them on bass. I'm not sure how much time has passed or how much they've rehearsed. Freddie is still Freddie Bulsara. And actually, about half a year passed between Freddie joining and Queen reaching its final lineup. They went through like 4 different bass players. The mic stand breaks while Freddie is singing, and he improvises with that thing that he always did with like the short detachable mic. The thing with the mic pulling out of the stand actually happened in one of Freddie's previous bands.
This is the first of many moments of like lazy fan service in this film. It's like assembling like a Voltron where everything's just coming together and they're like, hey, cool. He gets up and he starts singing and he kills. And anytime you're going to put Freddie Mercury's voice on the soundtrack of a movie, it's going to make me overlook so many things that I'm seeing. And I do love when he has the line like, I can't think of anyone more outrageous than me. And I'm like, you're the gayest man who ever lived.
Oh, it shows that the act is still sort of a little bit rough at this point. John Deacon dodges out of the way of Freddie fussing with the mic, where he has this look on his face like, what did I just get myself into? And Brian says, like, learn the song, Freddie, because he's singing the wrong lyrics. And they get through the band learning how to perform with that classic, some words on the screen that say 1 year later. And they are going on tour in a van that breaks down. Freddie has the idea to sell their van so they can record an album. I looked and I could not find any evidence that they had to sell a van in order to record their first album. I do love watching their all-night session in the recording studio. I love this scene of them improvising in the studio where you get this like creative blast when you're completely drained from an all-nighter. And it feels really spontaneous to me when they're like, oh, bounce the vocal back and forth, and or like, oh, let's put the speaker on the end of a thing and wave it back and forth between us. Sometimes these like things, like the inspiration to perspiration thing is like, sometimes inspiration does just hit you. Like Freddie had that opener to Bohemian Rhapsody in his head for a long time. Keith Richards just woke up one morning with the Satisfaction riff in his head. the thing is, like, you have to have your life arranged so that when you're inspired, you can drop everything and run with it. And that's the perspiration role. In addition to, a lot of the time, there is just like perspiration trying to reach inspiration, which is a lot harder.
See, my problem with this being in a montage is like this again is my issue with this movie. Like, we don't really understand why they're doing any of this stuff. And we vaguely know that Brian, like, we don't know anything about any of these other dudes at this point. So we don't understand why they're doing any of these things or like have any insight into their creative process. It's just all done over montage where they're doing all this stuff. And at no point do we really get inside like what fuels Freddie. Did he like the opera? Like, what role did that have in shaping him? Like, what were his inspirations? We never see it. And we don't have really any insight into the creative process. And I go back to Dexter Fletcher's superior product, Rocket Man. In that movie, they did a better job showing like what is going on inside the creative mind of a self-destructive, brilliant person and give us kind of like a sense of what they're seeing. I'm like, oh, you're going to put quarters on the drum. Okay. Why though? We don't understand what sort of like fuels anyone's creativity in this movie. It's all just kind of like being like shown to us in this way where they're like sort of like here, see, then this happened, then this happened, then they did this. Why can't we have any understanding of like all of like the eclectic things that Freddie Mercury was taking in at any given time that made him create like like these insane outputs?
I don't know. I think it's fun seeing them throw coins in the drum. I didn't have
Oh,
that.
I'm just saying we don't understand the why behind any aspect of this like very, very, very creative group of people.
Just think I can buy that they're inspired. And since we're an audio podcast, I'm sitting here looking wilted and dejected at my inexplicable liking of this movie that made $910 million.
A lot of people like this movie. And I'm being like a water throwing monster on this. And also, I think one of the reasons that you are compassionate towards this film is because you do love British royalty. You
Yes,
know,
I do.
we've watched a lot of motion pictures about the history of British royalty. And I think this is just part of that proud lineage of of nutty Brits who are wearing crowns. And Freddie Mercury is a different kind of queen, but he is a queen.
He is. He is.
They are British royalty. I see why you love them. Um, and at this point, they just kind of throw away that the new name of the group is Queen.
We find out that Mary's parents are deaf, and they come to dinner with Freddie's parents and the band because it's his birthday. This is the first time that Mary or any of the band members learn that Freddie was born in Zanzibar, that his family is Indian Parsi, that they're Zoroastrians, and that his name is Farouk. I guess this is to give us a shorthand for all of this stuff that Freddie has not mentioned at all to people who know him. Roger hits on Freddie's younger sister, Cash. One of the things they're establishing is that Roger is the ladies' man out of the group. He asks her, "What are you doing later?" And she says, "Homework." Roger will hit on anything that moves because he can get away with it. And this is where Freddie drops the bomb to his parents that he is legally changing his name to Freddie Mercury. And the phone rings.
The phone rings, and because of the movies that we've been watching, he picks it up and his face is really serious. And I'm like, oh shit, did he just find out about the MLK assassination?
Because Martin Luther King has died so many times in movies that we've watched. MLK has actually been dead for several years at this point. The costumes make very clear that we're in the 70s.
I couldn't help but laugh at like it was another serious phone call where I'm like, oh no, the King assassination.
Yeah. When the phone rings in a biopic, MLK dying is the Pavlovian response.
I did think that this was an elegant use of like sort of like the exposition train in terms of giving Freddie's background
Mm-hmm.
at this dinner. However, the editing in this scene, and anytime there are more than like two people on screen, is bananas.
I am not the film person here. When I watch these things, I'm about wanting to see history brought to life on the big screen. I don't know squat about cameras. I would have liked if they'd just gone slower with the camera work and given us more time to linger in the little conversations around the table, because I feel like the actors, you say that you don't see that they were given the material to build three-dimensional people. I saw it, but that could have been lost. Just let them sit in the moment a little bit of the exposition of everyone, because they've managed to put everyone in the same space at once. There's this one point where Freddie says to Mary, she's telling him that she's already that she's already used sign language to tell her father things, and he says, and tell him his daughter's an epic shag, and she says he can read lips. The actor playing Mary's dad looks like a little doll of a little British man with a mustache, and you see this man getting this killer glare on his face.
I did think there were a lot of aspects of this scene that were lovely, and that we did get a lot of really nice moments with people. It was just also so crazily cut together. Like, I loved seeing Mary's parents.
There's some part where Roger's like, no, I was studying to be a dentist. I was studying, and then John is like, no, he's a dentist. The number one thing I want to ask Roger Taylor if I ever meet him is, how much do you remember about how to be a dentist?
It's a good
Like, did
question.
Freddie ever ask him, can you confirm that I'll lose my voice if I mess with my teeth? It's like mentioned offhand here, but Brian May is an astrophysicist. The guy is a damn genius. I feel like this movie cares about whether the audience is having a good time. In its defense, it's fun, and we don't give things enough credit for being fun. I don't feel like it ever drags for me. The script and the actors do a good job of conveying that these four men love each other. Acting anger is one of the easiest things, but portraying camaraderie and rapport in a way that feels authentic appears to me to be a lot harder. I think everyone looks like who they're supposed to be. And here in this discussion of Freddie's childhood, I give Bohemian Rhapsody credit for no inner children. The closest that you get to it is when his parents show Mary and the band members the photos of baby Freddie. There's this picture of baby Freddie boxing, and it avoids a lot of the cliches that I hate the most, that were the things where I was like, and this is the flaw in Rocket Man, which we both loved unabashedly. I was observing, especially to see if any furniture is destroyed. I think that the closest they get to someone smashing furniture, which is another lazy bit of filmmaking that happens in these movies, where they'll have someone who is in rock bottom or frustrated smash furniture to get the actor out of, like, I don't know, doing a complex display of implosion, or something that people actually deserve attention for, instead of me smash thing now, me mad, which happens all the time in these things. And I think the closest they got isn't from Freddie, it's from when the band is debating which songs to put on A Night at the Opera, and Roger gets mad at them for not liking his songs and starts like throwing food, and he acts like he's going to throw something, and Brian and John yell at the same time, not the coffee maker. This movie avoids a lot of the biggest cliches, and that makes me feel like at some point someone working on this sat down and watched Dewey Cox and made a note on what not to do.
The phone call is not Martin Luther King, but it is returning champion John Reed entering the film. As we recall, he was also at this time busy ruining Elton John's life, so he took a break from that to get involved with Queen and wanted to sign them as their manager. His introduction to this movie is an internet famous scene of how batshit this editing is.
So until you made me watch that thing, I had no problem with how jumpy the editing is when I just want to sit and linger in the scene. My real question is, why did they arrange it so that 5 reasonably sized adult males are sitting around like 3 sides of an itsy bitsy picnic table? I don't understand why they didn't pick a bigger table or sit them in a way where they can get 3 men in a frame at the same time without multiple shots.
The shot composition here is mystifying, and it ultimately does no favors to like the coked up insanity of the way it's cut together. As you know, I took a class on sitcoms at college. Thanks again, Mom and Dad. And so one of the challenges that they had shooting the Brady Bunch was the fact that there were always like 160 people in that family. Like they had to get a lot of people onto the screen or into the shot at any given time. One shot description I remember really well, it's called the tight nine, when you got the whole family into one shot. And this movie is less artful than the Brady Bunch. I don't even think I'd blame this on Dexter Fletcher. I would blame this on editing, because editing is a very powerful tool in filmmaking.
Until you pointed any of this stuff out to me, it didn't really bother me, much like Rami Malek's fake teeth.
There's a visual arts expert named Thomas Flight who has a YouTube channel, and he breaks down what is sideways about the editing of this film in a way that is much more efficient than the way I'm describing it. This basically comes from too many cuts within scenes, and then also all of the shots last less than 2 seconds. You're not getting a chance to absorb the emotions. In this scene in particular, their emotions are just like John Reed wants to sign them and they're happy about it. Why do we keep cutting back and forth to people? Although Freddie is wearing a jacket that looks like that dinosaur in Jurassic Park that sprays Newman from Seinfeld.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did. I was thinking, and they mentioned that looks aquatic. I have to say that I preferred Rob Stark's John Reed in Rocket Man over Littlefinger's in Bohemian Rhapsody. I'm referring to these actors by the names of their Game of Thrones characters. I'm just going to keep calling that actor Rob Stark for the rest of his career, because I get his name confused with the American football player who has a lot of video games named after him because they have the same last name.
And that's fair.
Anyway, John Reed happened later in Queen's real life story. And it would be tedious to show the full story of their disagreement with their first label, Trident. We know from Rocket Man that John Reed is good at getting artists out of onerous recording contracts, but that's not what happened precisely. Trident poured a lot of money into Queen while leaving the band members a pittance to live on, and a bunch of back and forth. And I don't want to watch several years of I don't want to watch several years of complications in a band's relationship with their record label.
Fair enough. There's a moment that I dislike greatly because it's an unearned tell, because Freddie is like, we're misfits creating music for other misfits, and we're all misfits together. There's literally nothing that has established that in any meaningful way in this movie. We haven't seen them interact with fans or anything like that. And I know ultimately that it is very true that they connected with people because they were so unabashedly weird, but we've seen nothing that indicates this. It's just like a fan service line, and it feels insufferable.
I feel like it's implicit in the way that they always look on stage like they never had anything to do with each other before this moment, which the movie captures pretty well.
Fair.
In terms of things we don't see, Queen was kind of cursed when it came to touring abroad in the US and in Australia in the early to mid 70s. One of them was always getting sick. At one point, Brian May almost lost an arm to infection from a vaccination shot because In the 70s in Britain, one of the things they did in the name of thrift was to reuse needles.
We're about to go on Top of the Pops.
In the real world, Queen had to work a lot harder than this. There were points where they'd only lined up a few gigs a whole year and they were like losing their like audience that they'd built. There was a gig they showed up to where there were 6 people in the audience. What we see here is they make an album with money they got by selling their van that was falling apart anyway. Bunch of good stuff happens, and then they make another album. Yeah, we're going to Top of the Pops.
They did some split screen work here, which I liked because you did get to see the performance alongside like the audience responding to it.
And then Freddie proposes to Mary, but this is something where the real life proposal was so cute that I guess they were like, no, we can't put this on screen. Everyone will say this is contrived. Because when Freddie Mercury proposed to Mary Austin, Freddie put the box with the ring inside he had boxes inside boxes and boxes. And so she had like a bunch of boxes to open where it was like she opened a box and there was another box and another box and another box until she finally got to the itty bitty box with a ring, which I guess they didn't do because it seemed like a film cliche.
That's so sweet.
We get a montage of Queen touring the US where Freddie is picked up by a trucker at a truck stop who is played by Adam Lambert, who has toured with the remaining members of Queen singing Freddie's parts. And I should note here that nobody currently living seems less like a trucker than Adam Lambert. And then we cut to a record label room with Mike Myers, and this is the point where you and I were united in disdain. Ray Foster, the Mike Myers character, isn't real. He says a bunch of things that are way too on the nose, like the allusion to Wayne's World, where he's like, this isn't a song that kids will sing along to in the car.
This made me furious. I have a complicated relationship with fan service, but this is infuriating. This feels like he like bought a walk-on role in this movie. Like I hate like this kind of cutesy bullshit. I hate it.
And like he has this terrible beard that looks like they like just applied glue to fluff and put it on his face. Mike Myers is a gratuitous bit of stunt casting as a tribute to Wayne's World's tribute to Bohemian Rhapsody. And again, the movie does not really dive into the very detailed story of Queen's bitter struggles with their record labels and contracts, but I suspect that this tasteless sleaze played by Mike Myers is meant to be an amalgamation of everything that Roger Taylor and Brian May hated about their early contracts and the people they had to deal with. And they also have a lawyer, Jim Beach, who Freddie renames Miami Beach because the name Jim Beach is boring.
Miami Beach is played by Tom Hollander, who just played Truman Capote on Brian Murphy's show Feud and was amazing. This is another scene where it's just occurring to Freddie and everyone's kind of nodding along, where he's like, we'll call it A Night at the Opera. And everyone's like, no, that's great. Night at the Opera is an insane album. It's wonderfully conceptual and weird and brilliant. And I wish we knew more about the conceptualization of this, because we know it wasn't like he just like threw it all out there in a meeting like, let's just do this, like the way that like I might like throw out an idea in desperation when I haven't done my homework. And I feel like this movie just does such a disservice to the artistry by just making it seem like they're just like, yeah, let's just go, we'll call it A Night at the Opera, it'll be fun.
That scene where Freddie stares off into the middle distance and goes, yeah, that's good, that's really good, and jots something down that I'm like, okay, this is like service to the idea that you need to show people working. Actually, see, I liked them all going bump bump when Freddie is playing the aria on the record player and like chiming in and supporting each other because they're family and they're brothers.
That's lovely, but I think an album like that in particular, it's not pulled out of the ass, you know?
But how could you even begin to describe an album like that before making it?
I don't know, but this movie didn't even try.
So much has been changed for very good reasons. I don't quite know how this went down, despite having read 3 books in the lead up to this. Hovering in the background of every change is that Roger Taylor and Brian May are listed in the credits. Neither man is hurting for money, so why should we poke at changes that they didn't mind themselves?
Yeah, but they wanted to make like a Disney World ride out of the life of Freddie Mercury and about this band. Like it's a very sterile view of the art. I know that they were happy with it, but we've talked about movies where the actual subjects are hovering immediately off camera and how that is a disservice to the art. I think that like they shaved all of like the edges and complexity off of this story in a way that makes it ultimately less interesting. I don't walk away from this movie understanding Freddie Mercury any better than I did coming into it.
I don't know how we processed this differently. I think they made a fun, joyful film that people went to see with their families, and everybody loved it and came out singing.
Yeah. Yeah, they did, but I like it doesn't explain anything to us. It just sort of shows us like look and that's it. We'll get to it when we talk about the accuracy of it, but I'm basically like there is a band called Queen, there was a man called Freddie Mercury, there was a concert called Live Aid in a country called Great Britain, and that's all that this movie tells of the truth of this man and of this work.
So they go to a farm to record A Night at the Opera, and the movie is acting like this is their second album, but it was their fourth, and truncating and omitting in the name of story flow. Somewhere in here, we met one Paul Prenter, played by the actor who I will forever think of as Tom Branson on Downton Abbey. Paul Prenter puts the moves on Freddie, and Paul is a villain, but I don't think that Tom Branson is playing him as a villain, but as someone with his own narrative on the story he'd like to have with Freddie.
He's a villain, and I think like this is a good performance because it's a character that is like a little mustache twirly in his evilness and shittiness, but at the same time Tom Branson, as I also know him, never takes the easy way out of that character. He's one of the more interesting people to watch in this movie because you feel like a sense of him almost at war with himself. I don't want to see a whole movie about Paul, but there was like a whole there was a whole movie going on inside of Tom.
So Freddie tells Paul the terms of the hookup. Paul will be very resentful that he can't change this. Like, you feel that Paul is jealous of Mary. And I wanted to say I find the lip syncing to be very well matched, and I appreciate not having to listen to an imitation of Freddie Mercury when the real thing is readily available. I would much, much rather watch lip syncing than watch someone who cannot sing as well as the person they are playing attempt to sing that person's parts. It is usually Oscar bation. I remember thinking, why would people pay to hear Reese Witherspoon and Joaquin Phoenix singing as June Carter Cash and Johnny Cash when the real thing is readily available? And I feel resentful if I don't get to hear the real thing just so some actor can have their ego trip. Anyway, it is true that the recording of Bohemian Rhapsody, the song, took 3 weeks, and that this was about as long as it took to cut an average album in those days. And I love this montage of the recording. We see the rapport, we see them being themselves and doing the work. And there is a story in every book that I read about how they wore the tape so thin, overdubbing the operatic section, that it became transparent. There's one point where Roger is recording where he says, "Who even is Galileo?" And that bugged me because I don't buy that Roger Taylor hadn't heard of Galileo. He's an educated man, and one of his best mates is an astrophysicist.
I agree with that. Um, I what on earth inspired this song? We don't get that. And we do cut here immediately to watching Mike Myers listening to this song and being like, you teenagers won't bang their head to this song. Which, again, yes, yes, infuriating. And also, though, it did kind of remind me, though, a lot of people of a certain age, like the first exposure they got to like how bananas Queen was Wayne's World. Bohemian Rhapsody was the gateway drug for so many of us
Mhm.
to Bicycle Race and like Stone Cold Crazy and Killer Queen. These guys are really weird and wild and unlike anything else that's out there. Um, so I will forever be grateful for that. But stop, movie. Get the heck out of here with this Mike Myers nonsense.
At this point, Paul Prenter makes his one positive contribution to Queen or to the life of Freddie Mercury, which is to say that MacArthur Park was 7 minutes long. And he says this when Mike Myers objects to how long Bohemian Rhapsody is because it's twice the length of an average single. And somebody did point out in a similar meeting to this that MacArthur Park was 7 minutes long, but it was not Paul Prenter, and I don't know why they had to give him this line. Perhaps so that they could give Paul some redeeming virtues, so that Freddie choosing to sleep with him on multiple occasions would appear to be a more nuanced decision than why is he doing this. I feel like they give him the line to make him less villainous and a plausible human being, or to show that he is like kind of stunned by Freddie. And then the story that we see here about a DJ going rogue with Bohemian Rhapsody to get it played on the air is true. And then we have the massive success concert montage. Generally, I hate it when biopics truncate or omit and then fabricate in the name of a cohesive and non-repetitive story, because most of the time, the real more complicated version is nearly always more interesting than the one that is simplified for a mass audience. The heel in this movie is anyone who would attempt to break up Queen. Also true that Mary put their cats on the phone for Freddie while he was on tour. Freddie doesn't think that much of Paul. Freddie walks into a room where Paul is bought in some kind of rent boy in the hotel, and he's like, "Clean up this mess and get rid of your friend." We cut, Freddie is back with Mary, and he's playing her this video of everyone singing along to Love of My Life, but she's figured out that he's gay, which was obvious, although she does it after he's played her a tape of thousands of Japanese people singing along to Love of My Life, and he doesn't want the ring back.
I mean, I feel Mary's pain in this scene, is all I'm going to say. Rami Malek does a very good job here conveying desperate loneliness and discomfort. This is one of this movie's few quiet show don't tell moments.
I love he's crying and it cuts back to the faces of the cats. So we cut to 1980. Freddie has cut the hair and he has a mustache. So new look, new house. He asks Roger to stay to dinner, and here we see that he's lonely and that his bandmates are getting married and having kids and settling down, which he can't do. He can't plan a full life for himself because he is living in a time that sucks for gay people, and Mary won't come over for a drink, so Freddie asks Paul to throw a party, and the band comes, and they leave, and you see him growing apart from his bandmates. I sympathized a lot with him here because I know how much it sucks when your life has been fabulous and then your friends want to go settle down and go to bed early, and then your life is over too because your friends wanted kids.
I like in this scene how they continue to rag on Roger about I'm in love with my car. They all get up to leave the party right as Super Freak starts playing. Rick James coming on at an event is a cue to leave because Rick James's music is always a bad omen and
Mm-hmm.
always means something terrible is about to happen and it's time to leave the party. And then Freddie's like, bring out the real weirdness. And the party continues.
Yeah, Freddie is spending more time with Paul because he's lonely. He meets Jim Hutton after the party. So in real life, they did not meet when Jim was a waiter at Freddie's party. Jim Hutton was a hairdresser at the Savoy, and he and Freddie met at a club. And Freddie makes a blatant physical pass at Jim, which Jim objects to, but then they bond and they make out.
The actor who they cast as Jim Hutton, flawless casting. He looks exactly like him.
Mm-hmm.
And I really also like I liked his character. I don't have any idea what Jim Hutton is like in real life, but I like this warm man.
Jim tells Freddie, come and find me when you decide that you like yourself. And this is a part that I have a problem with because we're expecting to buy that Freddie has this one meaningful encounter with Jim and then looks him up in the London phone book 5 years later and goes to find him at his house the morning of Live Aid.
Live Aid was a super busy day for Freddie in this
Yeah.
movie. You do not load down a day where you have to perform with that kind of emotional baggage.
Maybe it's meant to be the day before in the morning.
It seems like it's all taking place the day of Live Aid.
But we're back to the recording studio, and the band is mad at Freddie for being late, so they start making up We Will Rock You Without Him to be a song that involves the audience. So, Sarah, at this point, I thought it would be fun for us to pause the synopsis and have a little casting quiz, since you hate Rami Malek's performance so much.
I don't hate him. I find this experience overrated.
I'm going to name some actors, and you're going to tell me why you think that they would do a better job than Rami Malek in this role that he won an Oscar for.
Okay.
Nick Kroll.
Nick Kroll, I think, looks more like Freddie Mercury than Rami Malek. And he can play diva very well.
Oscar Isaac.
Oh my God, Oscar Isaac can sing, he can dance, he's gorgeous in the same way that Freddie Mercury is gorgeous. I want to see that movie.
Sacha Baron Cohen.
I don't know how I feel about Sacha Baron Cohen playing Freddie Mercury. In my head, Sacha Baron Cohen is 7 feet tall. So he seems like he's too tall for the role. I don't actually know how tall he is. He just seems 7 feet tall and like stretched out. Like he would be like maybe like just like really like too string beanie to play Freddie.
Oh, Ben Whishaw, who I thought just seems too wispy. I loved him.
I don't see that at all. I don't understand that. I love Ben Whishaw. I love Paddington. There's so much to love about him, but him as Freddie Mercury, I do not see.
Yeah, I loved him in a series about the National Health Service called This Is Going to Hurt. I sent you a picture of this guy, Tomer Capone. He's an Israeli actor. He plays Frenchie on The Boys, and if you've seen Fauda, he's the guy who gets blown up in season 1.
Where did you find him? Because of those two things?
Yes.
Because that was like my first question about that picture that you sent me. I'm like, where did you find this man? Like, what rocks did you turn over to find this potential other Freddie Mercury? He looks more naturally like Freddie Mercury than Rami Malek. Rami's got those big eyes, and they're distracting.
I'm going to read you 3 more names.
Okay.
Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis can do literally anything. They could have done a mocap one of him, like where he could play him as an orc, or he could play him as a monkey, or he could play him as Freddie Mercury and they could just like paint Freddie Mercury over him. Andy Serkis is a damn genius.
This is a white actor, and all the ways that is problematic. And
oh, it's so problematic. All
yeah,
of these are problematic.
On the same score, Judge Reinhold.
Have you seen that man move? It's he can dance. He can act. He's a nerd. He would fit right in with the nerdery of all of this.
One more name.
Is it the dog from Air Bud?
Robert Wool.
How dare you?
Robert Wool.
How dare you? How dare you?
For those of you listening in for the first time, Robert Wool is Sarah's least favorite actor ever. And if you listen to the Cobb episode, you can learn all about it. Robert Wool.
My God, imagine him making that little bitch face all over this movie. You're racist, Ty Cobb. I'm just a writer, a sports writer.
But so Sarah,
and another one's gone, and another one's gone. Another one bites the dust.
Come on, Sarah.
No. Robert Wall, nothing. Okay, of course I'd rather have Rami Malek. I'd rather have Judge Reinhold. I'd rather have the dog from Air Bud. I'd rather go on the Bataan Death March. All of the things that I've said that I would rather before Robert Wall. How dare you bring that man's name up? I don't like to talk about him. They made that beautiful man, Tommy Lee Jones, share oxygen with him. It's so wrong.
Sarah, you must have known that I was going to say Robert.
I didn't actually. I was literally sitting here being like, which Robert is she talking about? Like, is she about to name someone who's on Saved by the Bell? No, I was genuinely surprised.
Wow.
Yeah, you shocked me with that one. I thought very surely you were going to bring up the dog from Air Bud. It's a dog that can make baskets. There's no rule that says you can't have a dog in the basketball game. There is a rule that you can't have Robert Wall on this show.
I thought there's got to be someone that Sarah will admit that Rami Malek was a better choice. Cutting back to this movie, now that we've established that Sarah will admit that there were worse choices than Rami Malek to play Freddie Mercury. We have some more concert scenes. We have the first Ayo, and then comes the bit where Paul sets John Reed up to do a break up the band solo thing to get John Reed in trouble.
That was brutal. What we know of John Reed, the fact that someone could out asshole him.
So then Mary appears and the light turns on in Freddie's face, but Mary has a boyfriend now, so the light goes out in Freddie's face, and John Reed does his attempt to talk Freddie into breaking up the band, at which point Freddie fires John Reed because Paul has double-crossed him.
Yeah, that was very unkind. And then we do the another one bites the dust sequence.
Yeah, so we see Freddie's parents reading about him in the tabloid, where, of course, they're disappointed. We go to recording Another One Bites the Dust, because John Deacon, despite being the most boring man in the world, composed a killer line. And then Miami Beach agrees to manage them. We have a club decadence montage like the one we had in Rocket Man, and then we go to a press conference where Freddie is very irritable.
To be fair to Freddie being really irritable in this scene, these journalists were being monsters.
They're asking him about his parents and like, does anyone have any questions about the album? And then we go to the video for I Want to Break Free, where again, my issue that Ben Hardy does not look anywhere near as close to as pretty as Roger Taylor looks in the I Want to Break Free video.
I wish I was as pretty as Roger Taylor.
I know. All women wish we could be as pretty as Roger Taylor. And this didn't go over in the US. So in Britain, there's a sort of comedic drag, pantomime, Britishism tradition where this was acceptable in a way that it was not in the US. We see Freddie discovering that there are a lot of Jim Huttons in the London phone book, which, my gosh, all of these other Jim Huttons in London must have told him, you have to be at Live Aid. What are you doing at my house? And then Freddie doesn't want to tour anymore. He signed a solo deal with CBS Records, which was for $4 million, and the band does not take this very well.
All of the furniture makes it out of the scene intact. I can understand that they're upset because $4 million in 1982 money is like $1 trillion. Actually, more like 12 million. Like if it were 4 million pounds, that's like $2 trillion.
Freddie insults them, but he needs them. I stopped cross-referencing somewhere around here because I just wanted to enjoy the movie. I'm not sure why I get mad about medieval headdress styles and fork usage being off by 200 years in the episode on Beckett, but I'm happy to smile and brush off the fictionalizations here. I think it could be because the 20th and 21st centuries don't interest me all that much. I find pretty much any other century that people bothered to write things down about vastly more interesting than the ones that I've been alive in.
You can pretty much assume that everything you see in this movie is a shorter or more neatly packaged version of the reality.
I made the note here to bring in notes and get through this in a succinct manner, but
We
we're
don't do
not at Live Aid
succinct.
yet. Freddie gives them all this speech about who would you be without them. He tells Brian you'd be an astrophysicist who wrote some brilliant thesis that no one read. In Brian's case, this for me is pretty close to gaslighting because tenure deals in the 1970s were pretty fucking sweet.
Also, someone would have read the paper.
Freddie is so down on that Roger, who would have been a dentist, and John, who had a degree in electrical engineering, would have actually had comfortable upper middle class lives without him, where they probably would have been perfectly satisfied and not had whatever alternative stresses rock stars deal with that the rest of us wish we could have, including if we're relatively comfortable.
Paul and him alight to Germany, where they're going to record his solo albums. Paul is getting calls about Live Aid.
Yeah. And we see that Freddie is useless and self-indulgent in the recording studio without Queen there to temper him.
I do believe that even in this state, Freddie Mercury would have caught wind of Live Aid from somewhere. It was kind of a big deal. Like all of this fetishization of saving Africa by the British rock royalty of the 1980s was a huge deal.
Who knows how well managed it was? Because well-meaning rich white people always get everything right, Sarah?
Every single time.
Every single time. So Freddie is coughing up blood and waking up sick and alone in Germany. Mary knocks on the door in the rain. The apartment is a wreck, and there's so much unused cocaine on the tables. No smashed furniture, just unused cocaine. Mary tells him about Live Aid. She's pregnant, and she's having the life that he couldn't plan. So he's sad.
I would also just like to say here that he has the reaction that I plan to have anytime someone tells me that they're pregnant ever again, which is she says that and his response is, "How could you?" Freddie gets really mad at Paul for not telling him about Live Aid.
Yeah,
And
Paul shows up with a bunch of Germans named Didrik and Gungstrong German.
yeah, he's like the cast of Sprockets. We start hearing threats from Paul about, if you kick me out, I will go to the media and I will tell everyone what you are. Freddie decides that he doesn't care and he wants to exit this relationship. How many breakups do you think were caused by Live Aid?
I don't know. Tom Branson looks heartbroken and he's back and forth on threatening, and it's wait, I'll do this. This is an actor valiantly battling a script on behalf of his character. Paul goes on TV and talks about Freddie's life, and Paul Prenter never appeared on TV. He sold his story to The Sun in 1987, 2 years after Live Aid, Freddie calls Jim Beach about Live Aid.
Once again, in the human shield category. Underneath all of this, they're playing the song Under Pressure, one of the most beautiful songs in the history of ever.
It's one of the most perfect songs ever written. It has these three distinct iconic parts that weave together. There needs to be a radio station that exists only to play Under Pressure, followed by Total Eclipse of the Heart on repeat. Just
Agreed.
Under Pressure, Total Eclipse of the Heart, Under Pressure, Total Eclipse of the Heart, over and over again.
You could show me anything with Under Pressure in the background, and I'm going to tell you it's the most beautiful scene I've ever seen, because that is how extraordinary that song is. Like, this movie gets to hide behind this fictional set of events, including like the comedy of he goes back to Miami Beach about this. And Freddie still sounds like he's like not sure about it. He's like, this concert for Africa. And Jim Beach is like, the lineup's been announced. It's too late. And it's like, yeah, you know what? You're Queen. I don't know Bob Geldof well, so I can't say this for sure. But Bob Geldof, as far as I would know, would not turn down Queen performing at Live Aid.
This is one of the rare times in the film where, despite everything I know to be wrong, I feel emotionally swept along. I care, I can't explain. And we come to my stick a pin in it moment from the baggage handling scene way back while Paul is betraying him on TV. Paul makes a reference to Freddie as a frightened little packy boy when we know that this annoys Freddie and that he will say that he is not from Pakistan. Either Paul is too stupid to know that a man who was his lover for years is not from Pakistan, or he is deliberately needling Freddie because he knows that this will annoy him. And then we see Freddie go and eat crow before the band, who are intentionally late, to get back at him for all the times that he has been late. He apologizes and he tells them that he needs them.
And he's all but begging them to ask him if he has AIDS. He keeps talking about like time, I'm running out of time, things like that. And he hasn't been tested yet.
I read that he was wondering about it as early as 1983, but he did not actually know whether he had AIDS at this point. And like Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, at this point, the movie has also not mentioned AIDS by name yet. They've just had the reporters asking sinister questions about diseases and promiscuous lifestyles. Freddie got tested over 12 times. He really wanted to not have AIDS.
It's so awful. I will never not like be at least like a tiny bit angry at all times about the existence of AIDS, even when I'm thinking about like not thinking about it.
Like, if he hadn't happened to have AIDS, or if he'd somehow contracted it on a later timeline where the medication quality would have improved, would Queen have broken that mold on that very few rock artists make a good album after 50? I don't know whether Queen would have broken that mold, but I think Freddie would have preferred to have been alive, and that he would have preferred to have not had AIDS.
Certainly, and I think like there's probably very good odds that they would have, because they were all so smart, and because the music that they made continued on this like very creative trajectory. Like
The biggest liberty taken with the facts in the name of storytelling flow happens here. Live Aid happened in 1985, but Freddie did not get his diagnosis until 1987. Did he probably already have HIV at this point? Yes. Did he give the bad news about the diagnosis to his bandmates in 1985, 2 years before he learned it himself? No. He told them in 1989, 4 years after Live Aid. I cannot explain why I will forgive this movie everything. I can't explain why I'm swept along. I can't explain why I'm being good cop in this episode, despite everything. I tear up when Freddie tells them he has AIDS. It helps, I suppose, that nobody smashes any furniture in this movie. He finds Jim from the phone book, and again, I have trouble with how this was executed because it seems like Live Aid is like that day. And we've already established that there are a lot of Jim Huttons in the phone books. Did he go to a bunch of other, like, were all of the other Jim Huttons in London telling him, you have somewhere to be, Freddie?
Yeah, aren't you supposed to go on soon?
He takes Jim to meet his family, despite that they haven't actually been involved for very long on this morning, where he already stopped at the houses of all the other Jim Huttons in London.
Logistically, it's bananas driving all over London the day of Live Aid to like grab the guy that you want to be with and then bring him to your parents' house to have tea, then drive to Wembley and then get on stage. Like, no. Oh, and also he had that whole sequence where he's trimming his beard and stuff. Like, I don't get the impression that Freddie Mercury was quick getting out of the house every day.
We have the impression that he's waking up alone in the house. There's nothing to differentiate. Does he meet up with Jim previously in these weeks of rehearsals? Somewhere in here there was the AIDS test, and there's actually this scene that I found really touching where you see there's another young man there after Freddie gets the news, and he's gone in with like the glasses and a hat. He wants to not be seen, and this young man who's clearly dying calls out "Hey yo" to him, and like Freddie responds, and it's like, oh gosh, that poor young man is going to have that moment of solidarity with you in the AIDS clinic with him, Freddie, for not much time. And
this is one of those things where they're interacting with someone else who feels outside of things, where I'm like, this is very affecting and would have been valuable to see that connectivity that they talk about that one time and then never deliver on, like to see that happening in some other way at another point in the movie would have been really valuable and and would have been more impactful than him just saying the line.
at this point, why am I crying? I'm so easy to manipulate.
No, you're not.
I feel hopelessly pedantic and ashamed for pointing out anything wrong with this, and that's not like me at all. I'm just swept along. We're in the trailer at Live Aid, and Mary's there, and we are finally back at the big set piece from our framing device. I had no idea until I started researching this that the cops who introduced Queen at Live Aid were comedians and not actual cops. The guys who say, "We've had noise complaints from Belgium."
Yeah, no.
I thought that those were actual cops who were having like the most fun day of their career while trying to keep it mildly professional. Now comes the question, who the fuck is Bob Geldof? I think he wrote the I Don't Like Mondays song that I like the Tori Amos cover of, but I have no idea what significance he has musically, really, or why he was someone that anyone would have paid enough attention to for him to organize this concert.
You know the song I Don't Like Mondays. That is a song by him and his band, the Boomtown Rats. He also starred in Pink Floyd's movie, The Wall. I don't know how we got from the Boomtown Rats and The Wall to him being a very prominent activist, but you may be familiar with a song called Do They Know It's Christmas?
I've heard of Do They Know It's Christmas?
So, Do They Know It's Christmas was a song that he wrote to raise money for the famine. It kind of inspired We Are the World. I don't know how to explain him. He was also married to Paula Yates. She was kind of like a girl about town too, so he was in like an 80s power couple. Paula Yates later left him for Michael Hutchence. It was a huge scandal. He was kind of like the UK's Bono before Bono, and became very powerful as a result of his activism, and didn't have a ton of notable musical output.
I have no idea how they're famous enough to have organized this concert, and it makes no sense. Like pantomime, it's a weird British people thing. Bob Geldof. So I want to note here on like, I thought that the hair and makeup people did a very good job aging the members of the band subtly over the course of 15 years. Like, and also that like the shirt that the actor playing John Deacon is wearing is a perfect copy of the one that he actually has on at Live Aid. I don't know if this was a mass market shirt. I don't know if John Deacon loaned them his actual shirt, but someone had to perfectly copy the print and the sizing from that. And it's such a minor thing where normally I am not impressed at all in anything from a contemporary costume, except that it's clear that a lot went into replicating this rather quotidian, like, 80s shirt.
It's kind of amazing how much they nail it.
I did not count the exact positioning and number and size and shape of the beer cups versus Pepsi cans on the piano. It was all so well done that you have no problem accepting that someone probably did that, and it would be boring to go back and look. And we have a gratuitous cut back to Mike Myers alone in his office drinking some hard liquor, which I'm only mentioning so that we can rag again about how he sticks out like a sore thumb in this movie.
Why, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
They copy 12 minutes out of a 22-minute set without me getting bored, and I applaud them. This set piece was really well executed.
Again, human shield
Mm-hmm.
behind the music, because you can take that step back and realize I'm watching an actor lip sync, and because the music is so good, you're like, I'm going to tolerate it because it's pulling this Jedi mind trick on me where I think I'm watching Live Aid.
But I love watching them be Queen at Live Aid, and I think part of the thing in this was just because that concert is so well known because of how many plays it's had on YouTube and everywhere else. It's like, will they get this next thing right? Will they get that next, like, is Brian going to lean into the guitar just right at this point? And Gwilym Lee leans into that guitar really well and very much in a Brian May-like manner throughout the film.
Where I net out here, because this movie ends with the Live Aid concert and ends on the song Don't Stop Me Now, which is an amazing song like every other song by Queen. This is the kind of movie where if I start thinking about it even more, I'm like, why are we doing this? Because this is not in any way even remotely close to the truth of anything that happened. Like, there's a concert called Live Aid, a band called Queen, a man named Freddie Mercury. The rest of this is speculative and truncated and reorganized to make it more dramatic, and has like fan service, like having Mike Myers in it for no good reason.
At some point back there, we learned that the fictional character played by Mike Myers worked on The Dark Side of the Moon and worked with Hendrix, which is just, but he's not real. Now that the movie is over, to catch us up on the final 6 years of Freddie Mercury's life, the stories about a dying Freddie Mercury continuing to lay down vocal tracks when he was struggling to walk remind me of the stories of James Joyce pushing himself to finish writing Finnegan's Wake while he was going blind, except that Queen's music is vastly more accessible than Finnegan's Wake. Freddie didn't put out a statement on having AIDS until the day before he died. Jim Beach arrives and they close the door, and hours go by before Jim Beach emerges and they make the statement. Less occasionally than I would like, I turn into a soft-hearted sucker for middle-brow pop melodrama. I have to reflect that I have joyfully watched Bohemian Rhapsody 4 times now. I've never been bored, I've never checked the running time, and we have reached the end, and no furniture or household implements were destroyed. Roger did not throw the coffee maker, and the closest we came was Freddie pulling the mic stand apart, which was more an act of creation than destruction.
Fair enough.
So, awards talk?
Oh boy. This was nominated for a lot of awards and won a bunch. It won Oscar for Best Editing, uh, which is as I have explained it, as others smarter and more technically aligned than me have explained, doesn't make a lick of sense. It won Best Actor for Rami Malek, won for Sound Editing and Sound Mixing, which fair enough. Like the music sounds absolutely incredible in this movie, and I'm not going to take that away from them. So it was nominated for 5 Oscars and won 4. It won the most awards of any film that year. This was kind of a weird year for film in some ways. The movie that won Best Picture was Green Book. Um, the best movie I saw that year, and the movie that sticks with me to this day, is Black Klansman. Other movies that came out that year that were big hits were, A Star is Born, Vice, and The Favorite. Rami Malek was up against Christian Bale for playing Dick Cheney in Vice, Bradley Cooper for A Star is Born, Willem Dafoe for At Eternity's Gate, and Viggo Mortensen for Green Book. If I could choose, I would choose Willem Dafoe because, like, what are we doing not giving that man an Oscar yet? And that's a lovely little movie.
I would say Bradley Cooper because his performance in A Star is Born was deeply accessible and he had a lot to do opposite Lady Gaga. No Way in Hell to Green Book deserve any awards. It is a film where the white driver teaches the black classical pianist to like fried chicken. And Black Klansman was the best thing I saw that came out from that year.
I'm going to skip choice dialogue because I think I hit all the points I needed to hit. Did you have any?
My choice dialogue was, "What exactly are you doing with that car? Not the coffee machine." Overdub 24 of Fred's Thing. "Each cat will have his own room." "I'm a performer, darling, not a Swiss train conductor." And finally, "You're firing the wrong snake, Freddie."
Oh, I love Freddie Mercury.
Me too.
I'm going to do a quick refresher on how we score movies. We rate our movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively or objectively important to most films, specially tailored to specific issues particular to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes.
I would also highly recommend listening to our special introductory episode, Introduction, Who Are We and What Are We Doing?, where we give a rundown of the methodology, why it matters to us, and some of the inspirations behind this podcast.
And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
So for outward appearances, hair, and makeup, I gave it a 9. For acting and casting, I gave it an 8. For passage of time, I gave it a 6. For costuming, I gave it a 9.5. For quality of the script, I gave it an 8. For accuracy, I gave 3.5. For storytelling, was it cliched? Was it interesting? Was it inventive? I gave it an 8. For production value, I gave it a 10. For production and direction decision making, I gave it a 9. And for Do We Care, I gave it a 9.
So my scores: outward appearances 9, acting and casting 6, passage of time 5, costuming 9, quality of the script 2, accuracy 1, storytelling 3, production value 6, production direction decision making 5, and Do We Care 9.
Well, but I thought you were all about hating the teeth. Why did you give it a 9 for hair and makeup?
Because most of it was exquisite. To your point with the Live Aid concert, they got the hair, they aged people appropriately. I hate those teeth. I hate them, but I'm not going to knock everything because of the teeth. I'm not a monster.
No, I'm just surprised that even with all of that, you didn't knock out the teeth more.
I hate the teeth. I hate them. However, like the fact that like so much care went into so many other aspects of things, like the videos, like these not very like long or consequential scenes where like for all that, like the script is lazy and the accuracy is ridiculous and the storytelling is not good, the care that goes into recreating the look of things is kind of remarkable.
In terms of accuracy, I gave a 3.5 because The Conqueror got a 2. I think we gave Tennessee Johnson a 2. It's a very crowded field of things getting 3s and 4s and 2 point somethings for accuracy, but a 1 score is someone with this name lived, and
Yeah.
a 2 score is someone with this name lived and did the stuff in this movie. With a 0, we give an automatic 0 if a person interacts with a dinosaur and it is not a dream sequence. But I guess a 0
I
would
mean,
be nobody with this name ever lived and none of these things ever happened, so we're watching something that isn't.
we in this film walk right up to the line with the dinosaurs. We it walks right up to it and it stops short.
Where was the dinosaur?
I'm saying that we didn't get there, but this movie is coming close to that level of inaccuracy.
Well, it's close enough to the present, though, that yes, you see a lot more things that actually happened in this than you see in Tennessee Johnson or The Conqueror. My tally came to 8 on the line.
5.5.
The average for Bohemian Rhapsody comes to 6.75. So sorry, you did not earn a second opinion, Bohemian Rhapsody.
We gave it enough back and forth, I think, to make up for that.
Is there anything that you would recommend that people watch instead?
Go on YouTube, take the 25 minutes and watch Queen perform live at Live Aid. Rocket Man was,
Yes.
I think, a truer depiction of getting inside a really like a genius artist's head and seeing him collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
For like listening, if you want like a live Queen experience, I think that their album Live at Wembley Stadium, which came out in 1992, is so wonderful. There's like some really good, you know, demo session recordings that you can find on Spotify or on Apple, including like one early recording of We Are the Champions, where you hear just a tiny bit of the tension and perfectionism, where it opens with one of the guys saying, "This is take 1 million." Um, of We Are the Champions, and it ends with like, and it's a completed version of that song where it ends with him closing the song rather than it just ending the way it does. And
Oh.
he ends with a little like glisten up the piano and is like, "Oh, that was lovely, I think." And it's like there's just such a wonderful intimacy to hearing him speak. There's just like there's things I wish we had from Freddie Mercury that don't exist.
Yeah. Watch the real Live Aid concert by Queen. Anytime I enter Queen performing live into the video search on Google, I pull something up that makes me think, how does something this awesome even exist? With Queen at Live Aid, I assume that if you have not seen this video, it must be because you are a dead Ethiopian warlord and went to hell, because I refuse to believe in any form of rewards-based afterlife for the at least mostly good in which you are not allowed to watch Queen at Live Aid. I have no difficulty, however, imagining that you can download our podcast in hell. And I have no problem with the idea that our listenership in hell exceeds our earthly listenership by hundreds of millions.
100%. They're being forced to listen to this. Two bitches acting like know-it-alls. This is hell.
Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven.
Truly. Hopefully, out there somewhere, we're making someone's afterlife incredibly unpleasant.
It's what Satan says in Paradise Lost.
The fact that you just said that is another reason why, like, the men in hell would hate us.
Circling back to me being accused of being pretentious when I'm actually heartfelt. Yes, so I loved the great Willem Lee is fantastic in that if you want to see him in a role where he has somewhat more to do. And Rocket Man, and this brings me back to something. Rocket Man is a better film, even though it did everything I hate that I was applauding Bohemian Rhapsody for not doing, like cliched hug with the inner child, the black box, the furniture smashing. And Bohemian Rhapsody avoids these things, but is not, to me, as good as Rocket Man.
See, I wish that we had more of a Rocket Man film with Freddie Mercury, like that we got to experience what he felt like when he performed or what he was seeing in his head when he was writing music. I wish that we had a world where we could see that and where he could talk about that right now. He's an artist that, like, it is such a tragedy that we lost him when we did, and it's a miracle that we had him in the first place. You think about like the vast expanse of like incredibly iconic and in no way similar music that this band put out, like the fact that like they made Another One Bites the Dust and Bohemian Rhapsody, that they made Bicycle Race and We Will Rock You, like that's absolutely incredible that these things exist.
With that, Sarah, will you take us out?
Sure thing. If you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes, and our Instagram handle is at Biopic a Podcast Story. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official ratings for all of the movies that we've done so far. And if you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com.
Tune in next week when, for our New Year's Eve episode, we'll be talking about Spartacus.
Spartacus!
Yay!
So excited.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Stop recording.